September 11th, 2001, in Wisconsin, and in New York, and in Washington, D.C., was a beautiful, crisp fall morning, very similar to the one that you see here today. I woke up to begin work on wedding plans. We were getting married, my wife Janet and I, in less than 3 weeks. As a newly minted 24-year-old airline captain, though, just back from training in New York City a month prior, I called into work as one of the junior pilots to discuss potential assignments for the day. Junior pilots are reserve pilots, and they basically sit there until they get called for a maintenance flight or a sick crew member or things of that nature. My reserve schedule began at 8 o'clock, and I wanted to be aware of any possible pilot shortages I may have to cover during the day. A somber dispatcher told me, "There will be no more flying today, turn on your television." At 8:46 a.m., hijackers aboard American Airlines Flight 11 crashed a plane into floors 93 through 99 of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. I turned on my television just prior to 9 a.m. to witness a smoking World Trade Center, a building that less than a month earlier I had taken pictures of on the Ellis Island ferry. My head was spinning and the adrenaline began pumping like many of us that day who were watching our televisions in suspense. My immediate thoughts were a bombing or a missile attack by a foreign nation, and within minutes, at 9:03 a.m., a second hijacked airliner, United Airlines Flight 175 from Boston, crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center and exploded. Nearly 1.5 hours later, Ben Sliney, Chief of Air Traffic Control Operations at the FAA Command Center in Herndon, Virginia, his first day on the job, did something that had never been done in United States history. He ordered more than 4,000 airplanes in the air over this country to land immediately. Within 3 minutes, the Pentagon was hit. Terry and Greg were both outstanding pilots. Terry was a line check airman. Greg was someone who I would train with simulator training down the road. They were both co-workers of mine at Skyway Airlines, which was operated by Midwest Airlines in Milwaukee. They were both unaware of the events that were unfolding in New York City when they took off out of Grand Rapids, and halfway between Grand Rapids and their destination of Ronald Reagan International Airport, of what was actually going on in the country and in the air at that time. As they were turning final onto runway 33, and as you look down runway 33 at Ronald Reagan International Airport, and you look past the departure end of the runway, within a mile you see the Pentagon. They were turning final onto runway 33 and saw the explosion. Terry turned to his first officer, Greg. He said, "Greg, I think the Pentagon has just exploded." Another airliner contacted air traffic control and said, "Did you see that?" There was silence. A second time, "Reagan Tower, did you see that?" "Yeah, a plane just crashed." Immediately after they arrived at the gate, they were notified that the district was evacuating. By 10:48 a.m., police confirmed another plane crash in Pennsylvania. That fall morning was the deadliest terrorist attack in world history. 2,996 dead, more than 6,000 wounded, first responders, police officers, firefighters, paramedics, businessmen, businesswomen, fathers, mothers, granddaughters, grandfathers, grandmothers, and children. We don't want to admit it, and a lot of you kids grew up with this. You don't know it, but your parents, your grandparents, and those of us sitting here today who witnessed this, we don't want to admit it, but our world changed that day. Change was here to stay. In the days that followed, we began flying again. I remember going into ops, and there were probably about 20 feet of 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper with regulations we had to read before we went out to pre-flight our airplane. I remember the sheriff's department coming down to my airliner as I was pre-flighting it, searching it with a bomb-sniffing dog and a couple of deputies before we were allowed to board passengers. And then the recovery effort began. No longer were we allowed to leave cockpit doors open for kids to awe at what the pilots were doing in the cockpit. No longer would we be doing exactly what we had been trained to do with hijackers, give them what they wanted. And all of you young kids here today, you've grown up with a reduced sense of privacy in our country, government intrusion, social media, cell phones, things of that nature, in exchange for some more security. The terrorists got exactly what they wanted that day, and it was fear. On September 11th, Bob Beckwith made a trek to the hospital because his son was on the way to school on his bicycle, got hit by a vehicle, got hit by a car. Bob Beckwith went to the hospital. He saw his grandson was in stable condition, and he was watching these events unfold in New York City on the television. He saw the South Tower collapse. He said, I have to do something. He went back to his home. He was a 7-year retired firefighter in the New York Fire Department. So he'd been retired for 7 years. Grabbed his gear, bluffed his way through the barricades to make it down to the World Trade Center to start helping with recovery efforts. Bob Beckwith and his comrades, a few days later on September 14th, unearthed a fire engine buried in the rubble. Secret Service officers from the president's detail, because the president was visiting the World Trade Center on that day, ordered Bob and his friends to clear off a platform so the president could speak from the platform. Secret Service told him, now get off the platform. President Bush said, no, I want him to stand here with me. President Bush stood there with Bob Beckwith, and that's that photo you see today with the flag and the president and the firefighter standing there. That's Bob. And the president said, I can hear you, the rest of the world can hear you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us very soon. And we did just that. We took the fight to the terrorists. They did awaken what many have called a sleeping giant, and although I have my doubts that our nation could ever rival the greatest generation and pull off a D-Day invasion or a Battle of Okinawa with the 24/7 news and media coverage that we have today, we were united in the days and months that followed. National pride, civic duty, unity, and patriotism. You could not drive under an overpass without seeing a flag or a God bless the USA or I love America. On our honeymoon drive to Kentucky a few weeks later, we, as many people did, we took one of these chalk markers on your car, drew a massive American flag in the back window of the car for our entire honeymoon. I remember stopping at a gas station as we were rolling into Kentucky and watching on a television screen and people cheering in that gas station as we began lobbing missiles into Afghanistan and special forces began landing in Afghanistan to take the fight to the terrorists who had attacked our nation. Within the coming days, weeks, and months, thousands of civilians, myself included, raised our right hands in service to our state and nation to take the fight to that enemy and defend our homeland on foreign soil. And that is still being done to this day. I even have a staffer in my office. He's leaving within the next couple of weeks for somewhere in Southeast Asia to serve his nation. I will never forget the 1-year anniversary. I was at Fort Benning, the 1-year anniversary of September 11th. It was basic training. It was about 5 o'clock, 0500. We were marching down to the parade grounds, thousands of soldiers in parade formation, massive television screen, watching the events of the prior year unfold in front of us, sending chills up and down our spine as Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA played in the background. It is something I will never forget. Although it's blurred to this day, as much of basic training is for many of us, I will never forget that moment. And let me leave you with this, a story that I did not even know about until about a year and a half ago, about Heather Penny. Has anyone here heard of Heather Penny? No? Well, let me start with a quote from Winston Churchill. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. Heather Penny was a rookie. She was the first female F-16 pilot the 121st Squadron in Washington, D.C. ever had. The squadron had just finished 2 weeks of air combat training and were sitting in the briefing room when someone announced that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. A few minutes later, the Pentagon was hit and a fourth plane was reported to be on the way. Nothing was prepped, and the jets were still equipped with dummy ammo. Weapons or not, somebody had to fly, and now. It was decided that Penny would fly with Colonel Saspill. As they scrambled to suit up, Saspill volunteered for the cockpit. Without hesitating, Penny agreed to take the tail of the airliner in the air. Doing away with the usual half hour of pre-flight checks, and with the crew chief still scrambling to pull the safety pins, she powered up the engines. They took off to the northwest, flew over the Pentagon, and scanned the sky. During the flight, they contemplated the mission. Thoughts of how to ram the jet without allowing it to hit a target were racing through their minds. Penny later reflected that the thought of failure was worse than the thought of a kamikaze mission. However, thanks to the brave passengers willing to give all for their country, they did not have to take out the airliner. Penny and Colonel Sassville were able to return to their families after learning United Airlines Flight 93 crashed in Pennsylvania. God bless all who have served and are voluntarily serving as first responders and in the armed forces of our nation, the greatest nation on this earth.